I've been lying to my boyfriend about my salary for 18 months. He thinks we're equals, but I'm earning double, and the secret is starting to destroy us both. The dinner bill came and he reached for it the way he always does, that automatic, slightly proud gesture that I have watched him make 40 times in the last 18 months, and I let him take it the way I always let him take it, and I smiled the way I always smile, and underneath the smile I did the math I always do. His half of that bill was 3 hours of his salary. Mine was 40 minutes. He does not know that. He has never known that. And as I watched him put his card down with the particular quiet satisfaction of a man who believes he is holding his own in this relationship, I felt the thing I always feel in these moments, something that is not quite guilt and not quite love and not quite fear, but all three of them pressed together into a shape I have been carrying for a year and a half and still cannot put down. His name is Rayhan. He is kind and he is proud, and he grew up the way I grew up, with not enough, with the specific education that comes from watching your parents make impossible calculations at the end of every month. That shared history is part of why I fell for him. We understood each other's relationship with money in a way that people who grew up with enough cannot fully access. We knew what it felt like to want security so badly it shapes every decision you make. We knew the weight of it. We had carried it together, or what he believed was together, and that shared carrying had built something real between us. What he does not know is that 2 years ago, 14 months before I met him, everything changed for me. Let me tell you where I came from so you understand what the change meant and why telling him feels like more than a conversation about numbers. I grew up in a house where money was a source of constant, low-grade fear. Not crisis every day, but the possibility of crisis every day, which is its own kind of exhausting. My mother worked 2 jobs for most of my childhood. My father worked 1 job and carried the specific quiet shame of a man who felt he should be providing more. We did not talk about money openly in my house. We talked around it. We talked about being careful and being smart and not wasting things. But the actual numbers, what came in and what went out, and how close the edges were, those lived in a silence that I absorbed as a child and carried into adulthood as a bone-deep discomfort with financial exposure. I studied harder than I needed to because I understood from very young that education was the specific ladder available to me. I took the opportunities that came. I made decisions that were strategic in ways I could not always explain to people around me who had the luxury of choosing based on passion rather than trajectory. By the time I was 26, I had built something that my teenage self would not have recognized as possible. I am a data engineer. I will not give you the exact number because it is not relevant to the story and because part of what this story is about is the weight that specific numbers carry. What I will tell you is that I earn significantly more than most people assume when they look at me. More than most people in my immediate social circle. More than my parents combined at the height of their working years. And more, specifically, than Rayhan earns, by a margin that is not small. Rayhan works in logistics management. He is good at his job and he knows he is good at his job, and he is building steadily in the way of someone with a clear plan at genuine competence. He earns a salary that in any objective accounting is respectable. He manages his money carefully. He saves. He contributes fairly to everything we share. He is not struggling. But I earn double what he earns. And he does not know. When we met, I was not intentionally hiding it. Or not entirely. On our first few dates, I was vague about the specifics of my work in the way that many people are vague about specifics early in a relationship, before trust is established, before it feels relevant. I said I worked in tech. I said data. I deflected the salary question the first time it came up obliquely with a joke about never discussing numbers on a first date, which made him laugh and which I told myself I would correct later when things were more established. Later came and I did not correct it. He made an assumption somewhere in the early months. I did not make the assumption for him, but I also did not dismantle it when it formed. The assumption was that we were roughly in the same place financially, different fields but similar levels, 2 people who had come from similar backgrounds and were building similar futures. It was a comfortable assumption. It made our dynamic feel balanced in a way that I could see mattered to him. He was the kind of man who needed to feel like a participant, not a dependent. Who would have found it deeply uncomfortable to discover he was being carried in any direction without his knowledge? I understood that about him, and I used that understanding to justify the silence. I told myself I was protecting his dignity. I told myself the money was irrelevant to what we actually were to each other. I told myself I would tell him when the time was right. The time kept not being right. The lie, if you can call a sustained omission a lie, which I have come to understand you absolutely can, lived in the small details of daily life. When we split bills, I split them down the middle, even when the middle required him to stretch in ways I could see but pretended not to. When we talked about future plans, I calibrated my suggestions to what I knew was feasible on his salary rather than what was feasible on mine. When his car needed a repair that he was stressed about affording, I did not offer to cover it, though I could have covered it without registering the amount, because covering it would have raised questions I was not ready to answer. That last one cost me something. Watching him stressed about money I could have removed with a phone call and staying quiet and telling myself it was for his benefit. I have thought about that specific moment many times. My friends know. 3 of them, the ones who have been close enough and present enough to have figured it out or been told directly. Their responses were not uniform. One of them, Sana, told me from the beginning that I needed to tell him and that every month I did not was a month I was choosing the relationship I wanted over the relationship I was actually in. Another one thought the hesitation was understandable but agreed I had held it too long. The third, who has her own complicated history with money and relationships, said she understood completely and that I should tell him when I was ready and not before. I have been listening to the third one more than the first one. I am aware that says something about me that I am not entirely proud of. There was a moment, about 7 months in, when I almost told him. We were at my apartment on a Sunday morning, the particular slow version of a Sunday that feels like the relationship is at its most itself, no performance, no plans, just coffee and the news and the comfortable silence of 2 people who have stopped needing to fill every moment. He was reading something on his phone and I was watching him from across the table and I had the sudden, clear, almost physical sense that I was standing at a door that I needed to walk through. I opened my mouth. He looked up. What? Nothing, I said. Just looking at you. He smiled and went back to his phone. And I picked up my coffee and I closed the door and I told myself next time. Next time when the moment is better. Next time when I have figured out the right words. Next time when I understand more clearly what I am afraid of and whether the fear is rational. The fear is this. I grew up with nothing and I built something and the something I built is mine in a way that nothing in my childhood ever fully felt mine. It is the product of choices I made alone and work I did alone and a decade of discipline that nobody handed me. And Rayhan knowing about it means Rayhan having a relationship with it. Means his feelings about it becoming part of it. Means the possibility of resentment or discomfort or a shift in the dynamic between us that changes something I need to stay unchanged. I know how that sounds. I have heard it described back to me by Sana in terms that were not flattering. She said I was treating my income as a secret identity rather than a fact about my life, and that secret identities require constant maintenance and eventually the maintenance becomes more exhausting than the truth would have been. She was not wrong. The maintenance is exhausting. I check myself constantly in conversations about money. I catch myself before I reference things that would reveal the gap. I have a mental map of what he thinks I earn and I navigate every financial conversation with reference to that map, making sure nothing I say lands outside its borders. It is a performance that runs underneath every interaction we have that touches money, which in a real relationship is more interactions than you would think. Last month he started talking about moving in together. Not hypothetically. Specifically. He had been looking at apartments. He showed me listings. He talked about what was realistic on their combined budget, meaning the budget he believed we had, the one that was built on his number and the number he assumed was mine. I sat with my phone looking at the listings he had sent and I understood, with a clarity I had been avoiding for a year and a half, that the door I had been standing in front of was no longer optional. You cannot build a shared life on a shared budget that one person does not know is false. You cannot move into an apartment together and maintain the architecture of this particular silence. The silence that works across dinner tables and weekend mornings does not survive lease agreements and joint expenses and the daily proximity of a shared home. I knew I had to tell him. I also knew, sitting there with his excited message about a 2-bedroom in a neighborhood we both liked, that I had waited so long that the telling was no longer just a conversation about money. It was a conversation about what I had been doing for 18 months. About every split bill. About the car repair. About the Sunday morning when I opened my mouth and said nothing. About what kind of person chooses sustained comfortable silence over uncomfortable necessary truth, and whether that person is someone he actually knows, or someone he has been carefully shown. I had not told him yet. But the apartment listings were sitting on my phone. And the silence had run out of room. I told him on a Tuesday. Not because Tuesday had any particular significance. Because I had been planning to tell him on Saturday and then Sunday and then Monday, and each time the planning had collapsed into a familiar internal negotiation that ended with not yet and a reason that felt sufficient in the moment and hollow by the next morning. By Tuesday I had stopped negotiating. I texted him in the afternoon and asked if he could come over that evening. He said yes, asked if everything was okay, used the question mark that told me his instincts were already reading something in the texture of the message. I told him everything was fine. Which was the last dishonest thing I said to him. He arrived at 7. I had thought about how to start and had rejected every version I had rehearsed because every version sounded either like a confession or like a presentation, and I did not want it to be either. I wanted it to be a conversation. I wanted it to feel like something we were moving through together rather than something I was delivering to him. I do not think it felt that way. I said I needed to tell him something I should have told him earlier. I said it was about money. I said I had not been fully honest about what I earned and that the gap between what he assumed and what was real was significant and that I was sorry for the length of the silence. He looked at me. Very still. The way people go still when they are deciding how to receive something. How significant, he said. I told him the number. Or close enough to it that the picture was clear. The silence that followed was different from the comfortable Sunday morning silences I had been filing it alongside in my memory. This one had texture. I could feel him processing inside it, not just the number but the architecture of what the number meant, what it had meant for every dinner, every split bill, every conversation about budgets and futures and what was realistic. The car, he said finally. I did not understand immediately. My car. In November. I was stressed about it for 2 weeks. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the middle distance in the way of someone doing a specific kind of accounting. You could have covered that without thinking about it. Yes, I said. But you let me be stressed. I did not know how to explain where the money came from without explaining everything. He looked at me then. So you chose my stress over your explanation. I did not have an answer for that was not yes, which was the honest answer, which I gave him. He got up. Not dramatically. He did not raise his voice. He walked to the kitchen and stood there for a moment with his back to me, hands on the counter, in the specific posture of someone who needs to put physical distance between themselves and a feeling before they can think inside it. I sat on the couch and I let him have the distance, and I did not fill the silence because I had been filling silences for 18 months and it had not served either of us. He turned around eventually. I need to understand something, he said. Was it about me specifically? Did you think I would react badly? Or was it just easier to not tell me? This was the most important question he could have asked and he asked it precisely. I thought about it before I answered. Both, I said. I was afraid of how it would change things between us. And it was easier not to tell you. Those two things were both true at the same time and I used each one to justify the other. He nodded slowly. Like he was taking that in and locating it somewhere. The apartments, he said. Yes. You were looking at them knowing the whole time that the budget conversation was. Yes. He sat back down. Not next to me. In the chair across from me. The geography of the room had changed and we were both aware of it. I grew up without money, he said. You know that. I know. So you know that money is not just money for me. It is not just a number. It is what my parents thought about. It is what I spent 20 years watching determine everything around me. When I met you and I thought we understood that the same way, he stopped. Started again. That felt like something important. That felt like being known. I know, I said. My voice was smaller than I intended. You let me feel known in a way that wasn't complete. There it was. The precise articulation of the thing I had been avoiding naming for 18 months. Not that I had hidden a number. That I had allowed him to feel understood by me in a way that was constructed on an omission. That the knowing he had felt had been curated. That I had let him believe we were standing on the same ground when I had been standing somewhere else entirely and showing him only the part of the view that matched his. The conversation went on for a long time after that. Not all of it was painful. Some of it was necessary in the way that only honest things can be necessary, the kind of conversation that is hard to be inside and that you understand, even while you are inside it, that you needed to have. He asked questions. I answered them without the navigation system I had been using for a year and a half, without checking against the map of what he believed. It felt strange to speak about it plainly. Strange in the way that removing something you have been carrying for a long time feels strange, not immediately like relief but like the absence of a familiar weight that your body had organized itself around. He did not end things that night. I want to be clear about that because this is not that story, or not only that story. He did not leave and he did not ask me to leave and the relationship did not collapse in the way that I had spent 18 months fearing it would. But something shifted. Something real and something I could feel and something I understood would take time to relocate. He said he needed a few days. I said of course. He left. I sat in my apartment with a silence that was different from all the previous silences because this one was honest. It was the silence of someone who has finally said the thing and is now living in what the saying created. The few days were hard in a specific way. Not because he was cold or punishing. He was not. He checked in. He responded. But there was a recalibrating happening in real time that I could sense in the slight delay before his messages, in the questions he asked that were not quite like his usual questions, in the sense of a person retracing a year and a half of shared history and relooking at it through new information. I understood that recalibrating. I had earned it. We talked again at the end of that week. He came over and we sat in the same places as the Tuesday conversation and he said something that I have thought about every day since. He said, I am not angry about the money. I want you to understand that. I am not threatened by it and I am not resentful of it, and I think it is genuinely remarkable what you have built. What I am still working through is the choice you made. Every time you chose not to tell me. I am trying to understand what that choice says about how you see me. Whether you thought I could not handle it. Whether you thought I would use it against you somehow. Whether you just did not trust me enough. Because those are three different things and they mean different things, and I need to know which one it was. I told him the truth. That it was not about trusting him with the information. It was about trusting myself to survive the change in dynamic that the information would create. That the silence had been about my own fear, not his potential reaction. That I had protected the version of us that existed inside the silence because I was terrified of what the truth might do to it, and I had not given him the chance to show me whether that terror was rational. He listened. He did not immediately say it was okay. He sat with it the way he sits with things that matter to him, quietly and completely. Then he said, I wish you had given me the chance to show you. That sentence landed somewhere specific in me. Not as an absolution. As an understanding of exactly what I had taken from him by not telling him. Not just the information. The opportunity to be the person he actually was rather than the person I had decided in advance he might be. The apartment conversation is on hold. Not cancelled. On hold. We are still in this. We are in it differently than we were before Tuesday, and I think differently than we would have been if I had told him 7 months ago on that Sunday morning when I opened my mouth and then did not speak. What I know now, on this side of the telling, is that the fear was real, but the thing I was afraid of was not. I was afraid of losing the dynamic. The dynamic changed. But what changed it was not the money. It was the months of choosing silence over honesty, which is what he had to work through, not the number itself. The number he absorbed in about 30 seconds. The choice, the sustained repeated choice of concealment, that took longer. It is still taking longer. If you are holding something from the person you love right now, not because it is harmful but because you are afraid of what the telling will cost you, I need you to hear this from someone standing on the other side of 18 months of not telling. The silence is not neutral. It feels neutral from the inside because you are so accustomed to its weight that you have stopped registering it as a weight at all. But it is not neutral. It is accumulating. Every week you do not tell them, it becomes slightly more a choice and slightly less a circumstance, and the person you love is building their understanding of you on a foundation that has a gap in it, and you are the only one who knows where the gap is. The truth does not get easier to tell with time. It gets more complicated. It acquires context. It acquires history. Every dinner it sits under becomes part of what the telling has to account for. Tell them now. While it is still a conversation and not an excavation. I told him too late. Not too late to save us. But too late to save him from 18 months of feeling known by someone who was letting him feel that from behind a door she had not fully opened. He deserved the open door from the beginning. So does yours.